My name is Jeff Fix. I'm a Fairfield County Commissioner. On behalf of Commissioner Levesey in the back and Commissioner Davis to the right, I appreciate you all coming out tonight. We have been having a number of discussions internally and at a recent Township Association meeting all about the current need for more residential housing in Fairfield County, right? Our understanding is that we're 2,000 homes behind as we sit here today, with more jobs coming. Thank you, Mayor Scheffler and Rick, for all your work on economic development. We've got, we've got jobs here. We've got jobs coming. We've got our Workforce Development Center that's working really hard to get people trained up to fill those jobs, and we're gaining ground on that all the time. The next natural step in that economic development process is having a place for people to live, right? We need a place for our workforce to call home. So as we went through our township meeting a month ago tonight and had Bart Barrett come in and talk about, the growth that's coming, saw a lot of people looking around the room. What are we going to do about this, right? So we thought we would ask all of you to come together and hear a presentation from what I consider to be the experts in the field. When you talk about someone like Kenny Mcdonald, who's Ohio's very own rock star, and he's going to come and talk about what's happening with growth. We've got Dr. Kirsten Carr from Morpsey, right? And then we've got the folks from the Building Industry Association that have been very helpful in helping us understand the situation. Rick Ricketts, our Fairfield County's own. So you're hopefully going to get a deep understanding tonight of the need for residential development in Fairfield County. You'll get an understanding tonight of the best ways for us to do that as townships and villages and cities and collectively, right, working together. And hopefully you'll walk away with an understanding of how you can work with experts to create a tax environment that will be a financial benefit to your township or village or city. And then finally, we hope that you can walk away with at least a idea of how to start the process of creating a plan, right? We don't expect anyone to walk away from this tonight with a complete understanding of, okay, I got to do A, B, and C, and I'm good to go. It's not that easy, but it's also not that hard. It just takes time and effort and a little bit of expertise. So we've got a great slate of presenters tonight. I hope that you all will ask a lot of questions, and I hope that you'll walk away from here feeling like you know a little bit more about this situation than you did when you came in to sit down tonight. I am grateful that you took time out of your night on what turned out to be a decent night. Grateful that you would come here and participate in this. And I look forward to a great presentation. So thank you all very much for coming. It's my pleasure to introduce Kenny Mcdonald. I'm not going to read his biography because we don't have 25 minutes to do that. Kenny?
Thank you, Jeff. I want to thank everybody too. I just kind of, I guess my goal would be to maybe try to offer a little perspective. I moved here about 12 years ago, and our region was setting up a regional economic development group, and I made my rounds around the counties, and I just kind of reflect on the different time it was. 12 years ago, we were coming out of the recession in 08 and 09, and we had a housing crisis of a different sort then, right? And here we are 12 years later, and it's a totally different conversation we're having. The ask when I showed up in those meetings 12 years ago was, can we grow? Can we get some jobs? And, we put together a regional coalition. You guys have been an awesome part of that. We've seen some of the benefits of that with Magna and with Google and others that have shown up on our doorstep, and then all the other companies around our region. I'll talk about a few of them tonight. But I want to take us back to that time because I think that it helps us not forget where we came from. We've proven we can grow, and now we have other issues to tackle too. and I'm equally confident we're going to be able to do it. Just a little context that it is pretty incredible what's happening, not just in our region, but around our country. The opportunities that our team gets a chance to work on across our 11 counties are stuff that we've been talking about, and Ohio has been talking about probably for 40 or 50 years, which is this rebalancing and bringing manufacturing and industrial growth back to the United States. I'd say a good 60% of our projects are manufacturing industrial projects, many of which are literally coming to our communities as a way to not go to China, as a way to not be in Europe. And sometimes that's not for a great reason. There's a war in Europe. It's at their doorstep. If you're building a company, they're going to feel safer here. And then things like Intel, where almost all of the product is made in their product is made in Taiwan or South Korea, two places that have danger going up every day. And the shores of the United States are literally the safest place in the world to do it. And by the way, we want that to happen, because the chips that go into our fighter jets and our tanks and every piece of military equipment are all made in a place just miles, from really our biggest competitor these days. And we get to work on it. And the way we look at it is that's an opportunity we haven't had in decades, and maybe even since the end of World War II. Actually, if I look around our region and I go back and think about the kind of communities we're living in now, there was a lot of leaders decades ago that did some pretty incredible things that have set the table for the communities we live in today. And sometimes we forget how old those buildings are, or when that company came. But they came a long time ago in some cases. And again, we get a chance to actually work on that stuff. It is, it's also happening other places, but it's not happening everywhere. And I can't underscore that the way that we continue to look at it is these are incredible opportunities. I think if we were in a different community and those projects weren't happening, that we would be having the conversation we had back in 2010, which is, why can't we win some of those projects? Why can't we get the Magnus to show up in our community and build a manufacturing plant and have jobs posted and have our wages going up for our sons and our daughters and our grandsons and daughters and stuff. And I'd rather have this conversation. So I applaud you getting together and talk about it. And believe me, there's a lot of people that are going to speak after me that can talk about the solutions and stuff. I'm just going to try to sort of paint the picture of what I think the environment is. When we go around and we talk about housing, I would argue you shouldn't actually label it housing. I actually think we're talking about a workforce issue. And I would ask you tonight to just reframe that. I mean, there's lots of tactical things, and there's tax credits, and there's all kinds of things you can talk about that are specific to how do you get more housing, or how do you do it differently, and how do you make it happen. But honestly, what we're trying to do is bring people into our communities, have them build a family and a home in our communities, and build up our communities and be part of our communities, and go to work in our communities. Earn a wage, sponsor the Little League, give the United Way, eat at our restaurants. All the things that we wanted in 2010 when we said we needed more growth, they're happening now. Now we got to kind of figure out how to do this so that we can actually have workers a little closer to where those for help signs are out in front of our factories. And we've had the issue for a long time. I think this workforce has probably been the number one issue, even back in 2010 when we were looking, just to ignite more growth here. We still needed massive investments in math and science and getting our folks prepared. This county has probably done as much or more than anybody that I know of, by the way. Your workforce center, you've done what you needed to do, duct tape things together, bring your coalitions together, ask for help, get applications in, get the state down here, make them aware of the needs. But you've done some pretty incredible things for workforce. I'd argue that you need to think about housing in the same way. It's another obstacle to delivering that workforce. And then I'll just end with a couple of things. One, I will talk a little bit about Intel because it's not that far from you. And I actually don't like to do this because we have so many big projects that are happening and lots of small businesses are expanding. And the way we treat that is that's just another project on one level. And then on another level, it's not just another project. That if they actually build the entire thing out, it'll be one of the largest, it is the largest manufacturing announcement in the country. And I've done this work for about 27 years around the country. It's the largest manufacturing project, minus all some of the oil and gas stuff that happens in Louisiana and Texas, that I've ever seen in 27 years. Bigger than any automotive plant. You know, it's about 4 times the power of Honda that came about 40 years ago and built all these supplier plants over the last 4 decades across our communities. And we've lived on and worked in and been proud to say that they're part of our community in our region for 40 years. And so it is going to have an impact on this part of our region, and I would say even all of eastern Ohio. Most of the benefit is probably going to come to the Columbus region, and I think it's probably going to come to, you know, the bulk of it's probably going to come to 4 or 5 counties, kind of a zone around it, and that's an awesome thing for Fairfield County because it's going to be American manufacturing jobs. For all the reasons that I was talking about earlier. And so as we have these struggles and we're going through, you know, the difficult decisions that you all have to make as people that make decisions for your communities, I would remind us that we need to keep that on our mind, that we're doing something that isn't just about us. It's actually something that I think is going to benefit the entire country. And then I'll end with, I totally think we can do this. You know, they'll share probably more specific stats with you, but I know a chart we refer to all the time is we've done this before. In 2002, I think the permits for housing units in our region was, we had 18,000 roughly, right? John can correct me if I'm wrong. This year, maybe 11 or 12. So we're doing about 40% less housing, apartments and single family homes than we were in 2002. And I didn't live here in 2002, but I can almost guarantee you there isn't as much stuff going on in 2002 as there is today across our region. We have about almost 500,000 more people living in our region, most of them on the outskirts of Columbus, by the way, or in counties like Fairfield County now. And we're trying to figure out actually how to piece this all together. I am completely confident that we can do this if we do a couple of things. One is have meetings like this, have conversations, bring people who can say, okay, you know, how do we actually go about this? We want to maintain the character of our communities. We like our communities. We want them to remain the same. We like our schools. We want to continue the tradition of our schools. How do we do that and still grow? And accept this and actually deliver that workforce that those employers are needing. There's a million tools for it, federal, state, local, and there's lots of people who can actually help. You're taking the first step, getting yourselves together, but don't hesitate to ask for help. And I think sometimes in Central Ohio, we also have to come together and ask for that help as a coalition because we're the fastest growing part of the region. Again, I'll end with gratitude for the group just getting together because this is a incredibly historic time, and we have an unbelievable opportunity to deliver. And our communities can be better than ever. We have more resources than any of our forefathers had for the communities that they built that we're living in right now. And I look forward to working with you on that. You can always call on us to do that, work with you. And you not only have an advocate, but you have a partner in us and hundreds of other people that want to help this area get better and better. So congratulations on everything that you're doing, and I look forward to conversation and listening in tonight. So thank you very much.
All right, so next up we have Dr. Christian Carr from the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. Fairfield County recently joined MORPC a couple years ago now, and when I was a Pickering and City Councilman, we were members of MORPC then, and really there's a lot of benefits that we're reaping based on that relationship, but they are the preeminent planning group for all of Central Ohio. So we're very happy to have Kristen Carr here tonight, and thank you for coming. And we have a show.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here and allowing me to participate in this event. Again, my name is Kirsten Carr, not Kirsten Gardiner, although that would be a fantastic name because I love being outside and playing around in the dirt. I'm the Chief Regional Strategy Officer here at MORPC and lead our planning department and our data team as well. And so I'm happy to kind of share some data and examples of growth here in Central Ohio. If you can go to the next slide. I wouldn't be MORPC if I wouldn't talk about how we've been growing and how much we will be growing in the future. The 2020 census data was released last year and showed us that Central Ohio grew by about 240,000 people within the last decade. That's a lot of growth. In fact, we ranked 27th among the top 400 metro areas in growth across the U.S. The city of Columbus grew by over 100,000 people and ranked 9th among cities that grew over 100,000 people. Within the Midwest, we're definitely the largest growing region and city as well, which is really exciting. So if you go to the next slide, it doesn't look like we're slowing down, as Kenny already mentioned it, and especially after securing the Intel plant as well. We are still on track to become a region of 3 million people. That's something that we projected several years ago. However, the question now is, are we becoming a region of 3 million people earlier than 2050? I unfortunately don't have updated forecasts for you at this point, but I've tasked my data team to take a look because I know all of you are looking for better data and information to plan for the population growth. I want to know how much are we expected to grow within the next 5 years, 10 years, and 30 years as well. And so hopefully in the next few months, that data is forthcoming, and that will also be available to you specifically to your communities, to your townships, and the county as well. And as we are growing in people, both through migration as well as our birth rates being larger than our death rates, we're also growing in terms of jobs and the housing that is needed. One thing that I want to mention to this chart is that growth is not new to Central Ohio. Kenny already alluded to it. We've been growing steadily over the past 50 years. We've done a really good job at securing economic development as well. But certainly this recent announcement with Intel and the tens of thousands of jobs that are coming with that, direct or indirect, kind of tells us that we can put the foot off the accelerator as we're moving forward. If you go to the next slide, yes, and so this is also something that Kenny referenced. My team had put together this map that shows you in 10-minute increments the driving time from the Intel site during rush hour out to the different communities. Within 60 minutes of driving time, you're reaching almost 20 counties. You can see that Fairfield County is very much impacted by it. And that means that the suppliers are going to be interested in locating in your community and that the workforce is interested to taking part in your housing market as well. And so I know this can feel really overwhelming, but I believe it's a big opportunity for transformative projects here in Central Ohio. And so the next slide. I want to focus a little bit more about housing because this is really, as Kenny said, one of the top issues that comes up. And we've held a session with our members back in February. Transportation, workforce mobility, workforce recruitment, and housing were kind of the top ones, but housing was definitely at the very, very top. And when we think about housing, we already know that we are underbuilt as is. Central Ohio's housing market has been intensifying for years at all price points, and our housing market is turned upside down, and we now actually have a housing production deficit for many different reasons. We did a regional housing strategy a couple years ago and talked to the development community. Outdated zoning codes, outdated comprehensive plans, really skyrocketed costs of material, shortage of labor, all contribute to make it difficult to build fast, and to build at an affordable price point as well. Just to give you some more points about this, in the 2000s, and again, this backs up what Kenny was talking earlier about, in the 2000s, we built about 100,000 housing units per 240,000 people, so one housing unit for every 2.4 residents. In the 2010s, we built about 80,000 housing units for every 240,000 residents, which is 1 for every 3 people. So when you know the average household size is 2.5 people, you know that's simply not enough to go around. And so following the Great Recession, if you can go to the next slide, the region balanced the deficit by returning about 14,000 vacant units to the market, but now that supply is mostly absorbed as well. And so I just wanted to show you, again, something that Kenny had mentioned as well, and I'm backing him up here, that we are still underbuilding and underperforming when we're comparing ourselves to peer cities across the nation. So these are housing permit data that were created in 2021, and you can see Columbus, Ohio had around 11,000 housing permits issued, whereas Austin, Texas, 45,000, Nashville, Tennessee, 27,000, Charlotte, North Carolina, 26,000, and so forth. So there's a lot. Underproduction is creating really big pressure for residents at all price points in our region. And so we know, next slide, when the supply is low and the demand is high, prices go up. And so this shows you the average monthly increase in home value before the pandemic, which is the green part here, and during the pandemic, which is the blue part. And so as you can see, it's been a significant increase. This, again, puts immense pressures on all income levels and price points, but very high pressure on people with lower entry-level wages. So as you're thinking about your community, do you have places for people to live within a variety of price points? I know we all know that this data is real. As a homeowner, we get excited that our home values are up. As someone who's trying to find a house or relocating, it's really difficult to do that in this market as it is so competitive. Next slide. This is a slide that Carly Booth with the Affordable Housing Alliance of Central Ohio put together that really illustrate what professions we're talking about when you talk about affordable housing or workforce housing. And so unfortunately, what we hear is that the term affordable housing has received an incredibly negative connotation. But what we're really talking about is not only our neighbors who are living near the poverty line, but also those who are making $20, $30 an hour per household, which are many of your kids as they're starting out with their careers, your teachers, your firefighters, your nurses, the essential workers that kept us going during the pandemic. And so I really want to encourage you today to not let the term affordable housing deter you from building the housing stock that is needed to keep your young talent here, to keep your seniors here, and your families in your townships, in your villages, and in your cities as well. Next slide. And the other piece that I really want to stress today is as you're thinking about growth in your community, also think about what people are looking for as part of our lifestyles. It's ever changing. And so the National Association of Realtors every year puts on a survey with their clients to figure out what are home buyers looking for as they're trying to purchase or rent places. And increasingly, year over year, people are saying they want to live in communities that are walkable, that have amenities, that have more green space and parks, that offer different ways to get around. And so there's so many examples across Central Ohio. Next slide. Already where communities are reinvigorating their downtowns. They're adding this lower level retail and restaurant space and top level apartments. Where communities are really rethinking how to access their key amenities like libraries in a more walkable, bikeable cities. I know Mayor Streffler here has done a lot already within the city of Lancaster alone. And yes, these communities, can you go back to that other slide? These communities are adding density and apartment buildings to the housing portfolio. But what I want to say is they're doing this in a very proactive way. They're identifying key corridors for redevelopment while really keeping existing neighborhoods mostly untouched. It's not about taking housing away. It's not about changing the core character of your community, but it's really thinking about the opportunities to redevelop underused spaces, such as your aging strip malls or unused parking lots or decaying buildings that you may have in your areas. And when you do this, if you're thinking about places that already exist and you can intensify them, you're paying less for infrastructure, and you're also you're able to preserve more green space and agricultural land in the long term. And so in the meantime, you can create amenities and destinations within your community that hopefully you can enjoy yourselves, like restaurants or event spaces, but also attract other people in the workforce to want to live in your townships, in your village, and in your community. And yes, I fully acknowledge that this growth can feel really intimidating. It can feel really overwhelming, but we also know it is coming. And so in my mind, there's really two choices that we have to look at it. One is we can sit back and be scared of it and let it happen to us. And what I mean by is that the developers are going to come and they find ways to develop in one way or another. But the better option would be for you guys to kind of think of it as an opportunity to create the communities you want to live in and want your children to live in. And I'm sure that all of you can sit there, immediately think of spaces within your own communities that could have a better use, that could be made prettier, that could be places for our aging parents to live or housing for our children to be. And honestly, and again, Kenny already alluded to this as well. Now is the time to really be proactive and do that planning and kind of basically say strategically where you want that growth to happen and to occur to really preserve the character of the community that you want to have. Because on the state side, on the federal side, there are a lot of resources available today that we didn't have before. And so MORPC is here as a resource for you to help you access these resources, to provide more data and information as well as you're making your way through this. And I want to applaud you, just as Kenny did as well, for coming together, for having these kind of complicated and tough conversations, because it means that you really care and you want to have a community that you love, but also that generations to come love. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we're starting to paint the picture that there's a need, right? And that was the first thing that we wanted to accomplish tonight. So before we start talking about what kind of places we want to bring into our community, I wanted to stop for a second and see if there were questions for either of our first two speakers. If anybody has anything that's on their mind or anything they weren't clear about, now's a great time to ask. Yes, sir.
Do we know if there's a projected area that the housing growth may come? Because like around the Intel area, that's already pretty dense with population. So do we kind of have a forecast that may show us, it's possible that the growth may come in this area, that way our communities are better prepared?
Yeah, that's what I was mentioning earlier, that I tasked my data team to do this, because I know all of you are saying, like, yeah, okay, if we grow by another 240,000 people, where is this growth happening primarily? But I think this driving map is already really helpful to help you think and guide through those conversations, because most people probably want to live within a 30-mile radius, right, if they can. And so Fairfield County will probably get a pretty large chunk of it.
Are you guys looking at how much infrastructure is already built to be able to support that growth as well?
Yes, we're also looking at the transportation. We're talking to the Ohio Department of Transportation as well and having those conversations, correct.
It's one way I forgot to say this is it seems all this stuff like this stuff's going to happen because it's in the newspaper every day, like it's going to happen tomorrow. But it takes a while. It's construction of that plant will start this summer, and it takes 3.5 years to do it. A lot of the focus has been around the infrastructure, just around the site. What is going to be, I think, probably great for the entire region, but particularly this side of the region, is over the next. Think about the 2030. It's pretty close, right? 7 years we'll be there, and believe it or not, and the infrastructure that we're going to have, sort of connecting Fairfield and Licking and all that stuff, is going to change quite a bit, but become a lot more robust. And we've had lots of really, we've needed that for a while anyway, even with the existing growth. I think one of the good things about this is it's kind of a forcing mechanism. The other thing is I think the suppliers will be a little less intensity to it than you think. Like there's a bunch of them that go right next to us, literally. Like tool manufacturers, stuff like that, just actually have to be on the site all the time. And there'll be a plant here, a plant there that happens in counties like Fairfield. It'll be like, you have somebody to expect somebody about the size of a magnet the thing. I hope that happens. I mean, that'd be great if we had another manufacturer located here or two or something. But I think it'll be that intensity. It's not going to be 15 of them. And it's not going to be overwhelming. It's going to be over a 10-year period. And it'll take up 20 years to build out all the big numbers you're talking about. So all these big numbers, around 20,000 employees and stuff get thrown around. It takes 20 years to do that. And so we'll be able to do it. I mean, Honda's been here for 40 years. And they've built out and they have over 100 suppliers and stuff. We take it for granted. That took 40 years, right, to build out. So we got a little bit, it'll probably happen a little faster in this case because the world moves faster. But we've got some time to digest this and figure this out. So I keep saying, nobody's behind. And then I also say in the same breath, nobody's ahead. Like, we got lots of planning and we need to get moving, we need to think through things. But we're not behind, right? And we still have time to think about what do we want to do. That's the most important thing. Who do we want to be? How do we want to do it? That's up to you, the people who make the decisions in the communities.
Other questions? All right, thank you again, both of you. Don, you only missed the part where we were talking about growth is going to happen. You heard that about a month ago, so you're not behind. A couple of things I want to mention. You see the cameras here. We are filming this tonight, and we're filming it primarily so that the folks who were not able to join us tonight, there were a couple villages and one township that just couldn't find a way to get people here. So we are filming this so that if you want to go back and hear some of these points again or see a certain slide, and for the folks who couldn't make it here tonight, that they get a chance to catch up on this as well. While I was sitting over there listening, one of the things Rick Zabrak was texting me, one of the things that we hear about is the concern about turning farmland, right, into residential communities. Rick texted me a couple notes. Only 13% of our land in Fairfield County today is residential land. 54% of the land is agricultural. If we converted 13,000 acres of farmland into residential homes, we would still have more than 50% as agricultural. So while I recognize the concern for the agricultural community about losing land, I think we're still in a very healthy spot from that perspective. So we've covered the part where growth is going to come our way, and what we then wanted to do was talk about what does it look like to build residential development all across the spectrum, right? From the workforce housing, the starter homes, the apartment complexes, all the way up through the spectrum. So I reached out to my friend John Melkai, who's in charge of the Building Industry Association, asked him to bring some folks who are way smarter than I am here to talk about what that looks like. We're going to start with that group and ask John and his folks to talk about things from a Central Ohio perspective, and then we're going to ask Rick Ricketts, whose family's one of the founding families of Fairfield County and who's a developer here in the northwest part, to talk about things from a local perspective. So, gentlemen, ladies, come on up.
I'll roll through some slides. I've got a couple slides I'll roll through, and then we'll bring up the people you really want to hear from. We can move to the next slide. I wanted to present you some Fairfield County numbers since we were here today. Currently, and these numbers are come from our partnership with Columbus Realtors as well as our own data. There's about half a month of inventory right now available in Fairfield County, available for sale right now, which is not nearly enough, and that's down 16%. These numbers are all year over year. Closed sales are down 8%. The average sales price, though, is up. Over $300,000 now, the average sales price. What that means, though, as the price continues to grow up, only 44% of residents in Fairfield County can afford a new home in this market right now, and just under 70% can afford to buy any home. Those are numbers we want to make sure are as high as possible. In other parts of the country, they can be a little higher, and we need to work to make sure that we maintain affordability. Next slide, please. Studies showed that we need to be building between 1,100 and 1,300 units in the county in 2018. Much like Kirsten, we're going to be updating our housing analysis. We'll have that done in August. We expect those numbers to be up as demand has continued to come. I think the number is about 60 plus people per day per the last census moved to Central Ohio. That's a good thing. In our state, there's 88 counties, 55 of them lost population. So when we think about the growth that we've had, I would much rather be in this room talking to you folks about the challenges of accommodating growth than in other parts of the state where they're trying to figure out how to hold on, how to maintain services, how to bring people in to provide for the next generation. Next slide, please. A healthy housing market has a lot of different things. It does have subsidized housing, workforce housing, missing middle, move up, and high-end housing. We cannot call on one community to provide just one component of that. It takes everybody across the county and across the region to put a little bit of each of these components into their market so that we're not inflated where one side has all of the high-end housing, if you will, which is not sustainable, and one part of the community has all of the subsidized housing, which also is not sustainable. It's important to have a healthy continuum because people move up and down this housing continuum over their lives, and we need to have flexibility for them to stay within our communities. Next slide, please. I was asked what the challenges are. Right now, our material costs continue to go up. The average cost of a single family home has gone up 30+% just over the last 6 months just on material costs. Labor costs continue to go up, and Rick and the county have done a great job in trying to develop the next generation of workforce, but the reality is we don't have enough workers right now. And we need to do, and our industry needs to do everything we can to build homes more effectively, more efficiently, and that's something we're working on. Lending costs have gone up. And you turn on the news and you've seen that, and that's something that impacts affordability. But what it also impacts is for developers, when they go to build a project, what sort of financing they can get during that build out. That also has an impact on affordability. So we need to be thinking about lending costs in that as well. The things we can control locally, that's where we can really get some savings. Next slide, please. And I'll bring up these folks who really know what they're talking about, but right offhand, when we talk about what do developers look for, where is growth going to come, and that was a great question on specifically where it's going to come from. These are some things that top of mind people think about. Where are utilities? Where can we get access to utilities? Where are the schools? You're blessed here in Fairfield County to have good schools all around the county, and that's going to make this an attractive place to be. What does the zoning look like? How easy is it to get through the process? What sort of products can be built where? Your location, proximity to roads, transit corridors, and then of course the regulatory side. Once a project gets built, that's where the real fun begins, because you have to go through all sorts of engineering, all sorts of regulatory processes before you can begin to go vertical and get your buildings inspected. Those are all things that developers consider when they're looking to build a project. Next slide, please. Couple things I like to remind people, the next 2 slides, and then we'll get into folks. We talk about jobs. We don't talk enough about the jobs of the people who build these homes. For every single family home that's built, 2.9 jobs are sustained for a year. And then on the apartment side, 1.25 jobs sustained for a year. These are good jobs. These are good wages. When we're building residential developments, it's also putting people to work. And we need to remember that. Those are important jobs that people have, and it's important for our communities. They also generate tax revenue within the communities, whether you're talking about supply houses and income tax that your HVAC mechanical and your site engineers all pay. These are all dollars generated from residential development. Next slide, please. And then lastly, your schools are important. And oftentimes what we hear when projects are going on and going through schools that we can't handle the students, we can't handle the impact on schools. By and large, new residential construction produces less students per residential unit than existing homes. Probably the largest misnomer comes with our multifamily projects. Over 20 units They typically don't have many kids. We've got some folks here today that can speak to that. 0.076 kids per 20 plus units in a multifamily development. So the impact on schools is not as great as some would have you to believe. Clearly, if you add a large number of homes, schools are going to grow. But each development, independent of itself, does not outperform existing developments. And it's a good thing that people want to move to your schools and into your communities, I believe. So I'm going to stop there. Next slide has oh, yeah, and remember, a home is where a job goes to at night. I know that was alluded to earlier, but it's something we say all the time at the BIA, and it's important, as Kenny talked about and Kirsten talked about, as we grow economically, to have housing and to have opportunity for the people who work in our communities. This is my contact information, and as I bring up our builders here, if any of your communities need any data points, if there's anything that we can provide as an association that represents Central Ohio and Fairfield County, please reach out and ask us. We're happy to give you whatever information we can provide, any trends that we see. That's what we're here for. And with that, I'm going to introduce, bring a few folks to the stage, and I guess I'll bring you up one by one. That might be easiest. And to ask them to tell you a little bit about their company and one or two things that they look for in development and what their companies look for as they're assessing communities and trying to meet the demands that are out there. We'll start. We're fortunate to have a lot of local companies here. All three of the builders that are here in this room are Central Ohio companies, and all have different backgrounds and serve different niches of the market. Jennifer Walters is the CEO of Fairfield Homes and Gorsuch Construction from right here in Fairfield County, and they are one of the premier affordable housing builders in Central Ohio and the state of Ohio. So if you would, please allow me to bring Jennifer to the stage briefly, and she'll...
Hi, thank you for having us tonight. And again, I want to echo what Kenny said, and just having the conversation tonight is super important on what we can do in Fairfield County for all levels of housing and the growth that we see on a daily basis. So as John said, my name's Jennifer Walters. I'm the CEO of Fairfield Homes and Gorsuch Construction. I'm a third-generation owner. Our company is based and has always been based in Lancaster, Ohio here, and I was born and raised in Lancaster. We build throughout the whole state of Ohio, and what I'm going to represent tonight is that Fairfield Homes, we develop, we build, and we manage apartments. So tonight I'm going to speak on affordable housing, and thank you, Kirsten, for demystifying affordable housing a little bit. That is predominantly what we develop and build throughout the state of Ohio, and that is through the low income tax credit program. And what we look for predominantly as we go into a community is we follow what the state of Ohio puts out called a qualified allocation plan. And so that is a 2-year plan that the state of Ohio puts out, and it is a highly competitive plan that developers read, follow, and we go out and we find sites and communities that welcome affordable housing and that need affordable housing and that can fit into this qualified allocation plan in order to get competitive points. And then through that we submit an application and we are awarded based on that. So how we work with communities is we share that qualified allocation plan, and how does that community or county fit into that plan, so therefore we can be successful in our award and create affordable housing in that community. Affordable housing ranges from 30 to 60% average median income for our families. So like Kirsten said, it is it's the people already in our communities, senior citizens on Social Security, single parents, working in all our industries in our communities. that good? Okay.
Jennifer, Fairfield Homes also does, not only do they work with the Administration of Housing, Urban Development Administration, they also work with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, as they're one of the few developers that does rural affordable housing across the state of Ohio. One of the largest builders in the United States is MI Homes, and they happen to be a company that is founded in Columbus and still operated out of Columbus. And we're fortunate to have Josh Barkin, Vice President of Land with MI Homes, and BIA board member, to come here today and talk to you a little bit about from their perspective. And they have a perspective of not just Central Ohio and a long legacy here, but around the country, and what they look for in communities as they build their product. Mr. Barkin.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody, for having us. Commissioner Fix, thank you for having us. So my name is Josh Barkin. I'm with MI Homes. I've worked with a handful of you over the years. We are the 12th biggest builder in the country and the biggest single-family builder in Central Ohio. So this is a really good discussion. A few things that we look for, and your question earlier, where the people are going to live, is a really interesting question that we've been spending a ton of time examining since the Intel announcement was made. The thing that we've started to see in the very short term is a lot of the people that are already starting to come are coming from DC, San Francisco, Seattle, where places that a 45 to 50-minute commute is standard and maybe even short. So those people come in places where sometimes I'm like, gosh, that's far from downtown. Maybe I wouldn't typically live there. The people don't think twice about it. And 50 minutes is a snap of the fingers. That's what they want to do. So I think Kirsten's slide about the 60-minute drive time is really relevant. It will give you an idea of where people will live and where they'll go. So as we look, where do we go? What's next? How do we continue to deliver workforce housing, more affordable housing, so people, the family has a place to live, good schools? The first thing is infrastructure. Infrastructure. Where can we get central sewer to provide at a reasonable basis that can provide housing? From there, the next is zoning. What does the zoning process look like to get through to deliver houses? Those two things, I think, are so key going forward, that on one, the township, the village, the very local level, which zoning is, I would be looking to your county, your state, even the federal government to really help provide the resources that are necessary to grow your infrastructure needs, to educate your staff, to educate your leadership on what are the next trends. And then at the county stage would be doing exactly those things. How do we fight to arm, equip, educate our local jurisdictions so they're ready to grow? And if those things are there, if infrastructure's there, zoning process, zoning is hard. It's a very local issue. It's a very emotional issue for many people. How do we work as a community? And what I see most is if we can lay out plan. If we can lay out good plans, rules that make sense, rules to play by. We can play by the rules. We just have to know what they are. They can't change, can't be second bites at the apple. Help us do our jobs. I mean, MI has been in the Central Ohio community for 45 years. We'll be here for another 45. Little to do with what I've done, the great people before me, but the only way you can do that is if you really build great places to live, you work great public-private partnerships, and you bring on housing for everybody that people want. It doesn't do us any good to go into a community and ram something down someone's throat. But also, we know that what people, we sell a lot of homes, and certainly we're not going to build something if we don't think it will sell. So oftentimes we'll hear, well, that's not what I would like. Well, it may not be what I like personally either, but how do we assimilate into a community and give you what the other people that aren't going to live there want? How do we give great open spaces? How do we help boost the schools? How do we give paths? How do we keep the rural flair? Those are all things that we can certainly do if we're given the ability to do it. So look forward to answering any questions, and thank you for having us tonight.
Okay, last on the dais here. Metro Development is a great Central Ohio company as well. In fact, I believe, Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, their company built more housing units in the Central Ohio market than were built in, I believe, a combination of Cleveland and Dayton last year, as far as multifamily units. Metro Development has done not only single-family lot development for many years, they're probably the largest workforce housing, market rate housing builder in the state of Ohio. Joe Thomas is a leader in their organization in land acquisition and development, and also a board member. Joe?
I have to admit, it's a tough act to follow with Josh and Jennifer, that last discussion, so I'll try to do my best. But as John mentioned, my name is Joe Thomas with Metro Development. Our company is located in Westerville, Ohio. Fortunately or unfortunately, we've had the opportunity to see a lot of change throughout this area. We are the largest developer in just city of Columbus alone. As John mentioned just a few minutes ago, we traditionally develop roughly 1,500 to 2,500 apartments a year. Now, it's not only the city of Columbus we develop in, but we also develop in city of Columbus. Fortunately, we've been able to build in Delaware County. We've also been able to build in Union County and surrounding suburbs as well. As John mentioned earlier as well, we predominantly build workforce housing. Our average rents are $900 to $1,100 per month, and that's fluctuates depending on a number of items within that community. But what we try to focus on in our developments is essentially that element of workforce housing. So, wages probably on average of $25 and up per hour, as far as the type of workers. But our development essentially focuses on developing neighborhoods or developing communities near jobs. I know a lot of what Josh in the future with Morpsey was talking about the ring and the larger travel area, but what we try to do as development is try to focus our locations in our communities near and close to jobs, especially on the workforce housing side of it. There's a lot of to be said for the fact that people can live closer to jobs. They have less time to commute. They have less reasons to miss work. For instance, if there's a bad weather day, there's a chance or opportunity that people are going to miss that opportunity to go to work that day, or if they have a sick child, or if they've broken down car. So if we can place our communities near the jobs, it's a lot better off for those employers to have that type of workforce housing near them. And Josh said this earlier as well. When we do look at developing communities, we do look at developing apartment communities in particular. Our first focus is utilities. Size, capacity, location. Without having to spend, abnormal amount of money to go to and gather utilities and bring them to the site. So our focus has always been on, if we can find the utilities at the entrance to the site or up to the site, is the best and possible scenario for us. And then roadway networks as well. The cost of developing any type of housing product is directly related to how much development costs you have outside of your development, meaning anything outside of the four corners or the four walls of your development size. So if you have to put an exorbitant amount of money into turn lanes, traffic signals, other area improvements, sanitary expansions, water line expansions, off-site storm expansions, that all relates to cost of development, which ultimately relates to the end user, which is the renters themselves have to pay that cost in order for the job or the product or the community to be successful. Another item that we look for when we do our developments is scale. We try to focus on areas or communities that we can build roughly 240 apartments. Scale of the development helps a lot of different items. We have a large community centers that we place in each community, so it helps offset that community center cost. We have large amenity packages that we also put within the community, such as dog parks, trails, and other, depending on the community itself, amenities. And then interior to the clubhouse, we put in large resort-style pools, exercise facilities, coffee bars, office facilities, game rooms and such like that, that of course is an amenity for the community, but also costs. So scale of the community or scale of the development is important to us, where we can come into a development, we can build the development in such a manner that it is not necessarily cost prohibitive for people to rent there, but we have the scale for people to be able to afford to rent there, but also have the amenities that they're looking for. So they're looking for those amenities in their communities. So it allows us, if we are able to build more apartments within the community, it allows us to offer more amenities to our residents. And then probably, I'm not going to say it's more or less important than the utilities themselves or the scale is the zoning. We always believe that the zoning is more of a consensus building within the community itself, working with the local organizations at the front end of the development to reach out to the zoning board or the development commission or the city council members or the trustees. We think that's the most, as important as the utilities, to build that consensus, to start that discussion, to understand what their needs are for those type of developments, understand what their thoughts are on development patterns. So when we look at developments, the first item, utilities and zoning go hand in hand. We don't want to rewrite zoning codes. We want to be able to follow the zoning code and be consistent in with upholding those zoning codes and doing those developments. So those items are, probably on the list of important items is probably consistently what we're talking about today. So appreciate your time and look forward to hearing from you guys if you have any questions. Thank you.
So we're going to ask Rick Rickett. Thank you all, by the way. Very, very helpful. We're going to ask Rick to come up in just a second. Before we do that, I wanted to talk real briefly about some of the things that I've heard tonight. Infrastructure, right, and zoning and things like that. So there's a couple of things that we have going on that are down those paths, right? So we're very fortunate here in Fairfield County to have Jeremiah up as our county engineer. Jeremiah leads a transportation improvement district group that I've participated in. Commissioner Levacy's participated in. I know Rick Zabrak is there. Many of you folks have been to some of those meetings. The Transportation Improvement District has some concrete plans and is doing some really good work in creating the infrastructure that we will need as a county to help move people along, right? We've talked about how we're going to connect into Licking County. I think you brought that up a little while ago. Those plans are already in process, right? So we're starting down that path today because we know we need to move people around more quickly and more easily than we are today. The second part of that is when we talk about local zoning and local infrastructure, all the folks in the county who touch the development process, our utilities group, our engineer, our health department, our planning and zoning. I know I'm missing one. All the folks who touch development are getting together in the next few weeks. Utilities, there he is. Thanks, Tony, for smiling. All those folks are going to be getting together with representatives from the building industry to try to make our processes as streamlined and as reasonable and protective of all of us, right? But to streamline those processes so that we're not the ones getting in the way of development that comes down the road. So there is a lot going on behind the scenes, and I just wanted to kind of put that out there for you guys. So our next presenter, and once we're done with Rick, we're going to again do questions for the developer folks, and then we're going to get into the next part of the meeting. So Rick Ricketts has been a friend of mine for a long time. He's taught me an awful lot about not only the history of the northwest part of the county, but what it means to do development in Fairfield County. And so it's my pleasure to introduce my friend Rick Ricketts.
Jeff asked me to speak on development, a local perspective, and when you look at local perspective and you look at the audience, you have to realize that Fairfield County is very diverse. And so if we talk about what is the best approach to local development in Hocking Township or Amanda Township or Byrne Township, it's arguably going to be a lot different than it would be in Violet Township or Greenfield Township. So what I want to try to do is start the conversation by saying my opening comment is we need to do better. And then the question is, how do we do better? And I've got 3 points, but those 3 points are able to be universally used across the board regardless of where you are in Fairfield County, because it all is about trying to build and develop the process by which you are able to accomplish things in your local jurisdiction. I also want to note that I am not going to be making this presentation in the context of zoning attorneys. So if you are looking at this as a representative of a township, a village, a city, and saying, well, that's not exactly the way we're supposed to approach it from a zoning perspective, that's not what our council says, completely going to be correct, because I'm looking at this in a bigger perspective. I'm looking at this as what is the approach that is in the best interest of your community. And that is a process that you have to look at, but I'm not looking at it in the context of making a zoning presentation and whether or not it's in compliance with Ohio law or zoning law. How do we do better? I think there are 3 ways that we can build better communities however we want to build our community. And we have to realize that every community is going to be different in the way that they want to build their community. But I think there are 3 things that we need to focus on as we look at how do we build a better community. The first one of those is we need to be a little bit more open-minded and creative as to what options are out there and what is available for us to be able to use. There are a ton of resources that are available that other speakers have already mentioned, but we don't really use them. I've noticed here as my participation in Fairfield County, we don't move things along as well as we should in terms of trying to collaborate and move things forward. And I think that's very important that these kinds of sessions occur so that we have that opportunity to be able to do that. When we talk about thinking outside of the box and thinking more creatively, I think there are some things that come to mind, some of which some of you probably are not going to like that I'm going to say, but there are things that we need to consider from a local perspective from development. First of those is I think we need to be a lot more focused on where we can do mixed-use projects. This is a conversation about residential, but let's face reality. Mixed-use projects bring a lot more tools to the table to be able to solve problems, whether that be roads, whether it be sanitary, water, all of those things is a lot easier to solve in the context of trying to bring in some economic dollars that are coming in on the commercial side. So if you look at mixed-use projects and the things that you can use, and I know that our next speaker is going to talk about things like TIFs, NCAs, CDAs, and other ways that we can substantially help our communities, I would suggest to you that we need to do a much better job of looking at those opportunities to try to build a better community. The second point that I want to make is we need to do a better job of collaboration amongst all of the people that are in this room and look at the opportunities that are available to us. And way too many times, we do not reach out and work proactively in trying to build a better community. One of the comments earlier was, we've got Jeremiah here. Well, how many times do we sit down and look at how are we going to put in a subdivision project in an area, and yet we do not really look at it from a macroscopic basis in terms of how is that going to impact the roads, whether they be county, whether they be city, whether they be township. And how are we going to improve the process so that we are not creating problems for us down the road? All of us can drive around this county and find lots of instances where we'd say, why in the hell is that intersection there where it is? How can we possibly have let that happen? Well, there are ways that I think we can do a better job of trying to do those things, and it's bringing the people to the table. If you want to build your community, then utilities is a very important part of trying to get into the room and trying to understand how you are going to bring central sanitary and public water to your area. And some of you townships are out there, and candidly, I can say this about Violet Township in many respects. If you look, there are lots of places where we could have done a better job of proactively planning our community. And if you want to let your township or your village plan itself, then just let that happen. 20 years from now, you won't like the result. And the reason you won't like the result is because you didn't implement the planning necessary to be able to provide a project that looks at all of the issues and corrals them and tries to bring a good project to your community. So when you look at economic development, yes, we should be talking to Rick Zabrak and trying to figure out how we can bring economic development into our projects. We need to look at our schools. We need to do a better job of communicating with our schools. We need to do a better job of roads. We need to do a better job of efficiency. I met with a planner this week, and he showed me how you can do the same density with 35% roads, 35% less roads. Now let's think about that and look at that from every side of the governmental equation. If you can have the same density and reduce the lineal feet of roads by 35%, how does that not look like something that we should be looking at trying to improve upon? We need to do a better job of our parks. We need to do a better job of our stormwater. We need to do a better job of walkability. One of the things that technically, and this is why I say this is not a zoning speech, we technically, from a zoning perspective, are not supposed to look at the impact upon the schools. But we all know that's a fallacy. We all know that that's going to be one of the first things out of the mouth of the people that are there and saying, what's this going to do to the schools? Well, I think there's been some very good numbers that have been presented this evening that demonstrate that we need to do a better job of educating and understanding things ourselves. And that is part of my number 3 point, is we need to do a better job of listening and learning and understanding. When you look at the dollars that are associated with the schools, and you understand what it really means in terms of bringing kids into a school district, and I just completed this analysis for 3 school districts. Ironically, they're all about the same, but I will specifically cite Pickerington because that's the one that I did the deepest dive on. You can go to Pickerington schools and you can get detailed information about literally how many kids come out of any kind of project that exists. And yes, it's true that those multifamilies are very, very low in terms of what they are producing into the schools. But there's something that's more important. If you ask the schools to say, what is the break-even point on a house? What you're going to find, and this is specific data from Pickerington, and I'm going to actually increase this. It's not really even this much. If you have a fair market value $300,000 house, that is paying for the kids that are going into that school. And I can guarantee you there is not many houses that are being built today that are valued at less than $300,000. The other 2 school districts I looked at, even less. So one of the things that I think we need to do a better job about is listening to the process of how we are going to take care of building a better community. The final thing has been talked about a little bit about, and Josh mentioned this, but I think we need to go a little bit further in terms of hitting the nail on the head, because in Fairfield County, this is a sore subject for me. I don't know why it takes us 12, 18, or 24 months to get through zoning. We should have our processes set up. We should have the people that are on our planning and zoning committees. We should have our councils understanding that we should be moving through these processes in 6 months or less from start to finish. And that is a huge factor in what we're talking about today in terms of trying to bring product onto the market. The stagnation point is unfortunately very significantly associated with the timetable for zoning and planning. And we need to do a better job of trying to improve that. So the three things that I would suggest that we all need to do, but we can look at them separately as your particular community, is number one, we need to do a better job of being creative in our thinking as to how we can build our good community the way we want it. The second one is we need to do a better job of collaboration with all of the people that we have access to and provide us with resources. And the third thing is we need to do a better job of educating all of the people that are involved in this process of how we can work together to make it work more efficiently and effectively so that we can build that good community that we want.
All right, so thank you, Rick. We've done, I think, a pretty decent job now of laying out the fact that development is coming, and we've now done a pretty good job of talking about what developers are looking for. So before we get to the next step, I'm going to ask if there are any questions of those groups before we step forward. Yes, sir.
For the developers, what would you say is the number one impediment for you to be able to develop more homes?
And I'm going to ask whoever wants to answer to come up here so we get it for the video. So the question again, so I can repeat it correctly.
For the developers, what is the number one obstacle in developing more homes?
What is the number one obstacle in developing more homes? Come on up.
All right, narrowing it down to one is not that easy.
There's three of you.
Yeah, but that's right. The number one impediment right now is probably infrastructure and zoning. I mean, I'll go right back to that. Certainly, John showed the stats, and you see the cost increases. And right now, today, frankly, building the homes is as hard as anything we do. But when we look out, and Rick said it perfectly, 18 months to bring a job online. Right now, if I found a piece of ground that I thought was really suitable for our development, it is probably 3 years until I'm building a home. It's probably 36 months, or 40 months before I'm closing a home. So to think about that is zoning itself is a $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 process. You get another $300,000 in engineering. You finally get the reward of buying the ground for maybe several $1 million, put several $1 million in the ground, and then you get to sell one home. It's really difficult. And to have the process sped up, to have more infrastructure available, Joe said it perfectly, is having infrastructure at the site is a no-brainer, and your costs are driven by what's your common cost, what's outside of your typical stuff, and the number of units certainly offsets it. You can do more. If you have a 50-unit project, it's really hard. If you have to bring sewer a while, it is really hard to spread those costs out. I mean, as soon as I see a 50-unit project with a lot of infrastructure costs or a lot of offsites or a lot of common expenditure, it's got to be really, really high-end to support that. But if we're able to build a great community with 2 or 250 units, it may feel, but there's a lot of more money to go around to help the community with infrastructure improvements, to help the community with park planning, to help the schools. And so all of that becomes very important. I mean, your development costs are directly attributable to how many units you can get.
Thank you.
Can I answer that from my floor?
Sure, please do. Please come up and do that.
So from affordable housing, I just, to answer that question, is that I learned a long time ago the hard way that not build in a community if you're not wanted. So NIMBYism is the most difficult aspect of building affordable housing, and that's not in my backyard. But, so we do follow communities and cities and counties that want affordable housing. And every county in the state of Ohio can fit into that qualified allocation plan. It's about working with cities and counties that need and want affordable housing. And then I think a big point is also the county and the city being transparent with developers on what they want and what they need. So we as developers, of no matter what we build, can fit into your plan.
Is good? Yeah.
Take my shot.
Yeah.
No, I mean, as Josh and Jennifer mentioned, what our job, and I don't know if it's just more recently, but I'll say it is more recently because the difficult time that we have now is just the zoning aspect of the job. I mean, it's always come down to the willingness of the zoning boards as well as the trustees or the commissioners or the city council members to look at the overall benefit of the development versus some of the largest voices in the room. There's a lot of times where there's a small minority that shows up to these meetings, and I always say the only ones that do show up to the meetings are the negative aspects of these developments. So if you're, as a county, a township, a city, and willing to invest in, development or invest in housing or invest in, progress or growth, you're going to have to sometimes overcome those negative voices. There's going to be the time and place where tough decisions on everybody's part is going to have to be made. You're going to have to tell residents that we may understand that you may have a difficult time accepting this type of development in your backyard. However, there is a need and a place and an opportunity for this development to impact positively the entire area. It's always interesting because there's always somebody who feels that their property values are going to be lessened by development. They feel that if they're adjacent to a development of any kind, be it a large industrial plant, be it a warehouse plant, be it a housing community, be it an apartment community, they think that their housing is going to be negatively affected. But time and time again, the actual research shows you, or the stats show you, that there's truly only a positive impact on the overall area with a well thought out, well developed, probably input on both sides into the community decisions on housing. So it can be, of that nature. But just to put it, bluntly, it is probably the zoning process which overcomes the issues that nowadays that if we're able to overcome the utility issues a lot of times, the infrastructure issues. But as a group, it's difficult to overcome the zoning without other influences. Thank you,
Joe. So I think that provides an opportunity for a great segue. When we get through the rest of this, we'll talk about creating a plan, right? And that plan is generally going to be developed with input from community members. At least that's the way we would recommend you do it. And when you do that and you have a plan put together in conjunction with folks that live in your community, you can then refer back to that plan, right? When a development wants to come to your township, excuse me, or your village, and people start, standing up and yelling, well, you're not going to do that here. Well, it's in our plan, and you had an opportunity to participate in the creation of that plan. If you were here, great, we heard you. If you weren't here, you should have been. But this is our plan, and we're going through with this plan. It also, I think we're going to talk next about the economic opportunities that the townships, villages, and cities will have. That, there are things that you will be able to do with the money that comes from residential development that you can't do today. And so that allows me to introduce our next speaker, Tools to Benefit Financially from Development. Laura Komek is a widely respected lawyer in the field. She's covered a lot of different aspects of this, so she's got a great perspective on it, and I hope you'll join me in welcoming Laura Komek.
Thank you, Commissioner, for having me this evening. This is a really good forum for you to hear really where the rubber meets the road. The two gentlemen that you just heard speak, Josh and Joe Thomas, are two of my favorite developers because they are having meetings like this in communities 3 and 4 nights every week to discuss the practical issues that we are facing as we bring development to you. So as the commissioner mentioned, I'm a development attorney, and we're talking residential tonight, I represent single-family developers and multifamily developers, industrial and commercial developers. Tonight, to focus on the single-family and the multifamily, I represent market rate folks and I represent affordable housing folks, right? So you got the homes on the hills, you have the Fairfield homes, there's homes on the hill and Woda and Homeport, the Franklinton development. There's in each community there's different groups that are doing affordable housing work. One of the quick points, Jennifer, for the benefit of folks here, tax credit housing is driven off of AMI, right? So average median income. For the benefit of folks here, the current schedule of housing is based on 60 and 80% of AMI. Can you tell us what the incomes are for folks so that folks know what a typical income is for affordable housing?
So it does depend on the community in which you are, but we're talking about,
Central Ohio.
yeah, 40 to 45,000 for a family of 4.
$45,000 for a family of 4. Okay, so that could be, right, and it's in the realm of, and depending on the tax credit program that you can be working with, you can get up to 60 or 80% of AMI, so that's as much as $52,000, between $52,000 and $56,000. So that's, think about it, in your own governments, that's someone who could be working for you, who has a stay-at-home wife or a wife with a small part-time job and some children. Right? When you start thinking about how that applies to your people you know and who live in your own neighborhood, it becomes less about the old style of affordable housing and the types of subsidized housing, and it really becomes more about working people, right? And we call them working poor because they're working for some of your governments, and they are barely meeting income minimums for that type of housing. So it's closer. It's a lot closer than you might think, market housing and affordable housing and who's able to afford what. It's closer than I think most people appreciate. We were doing a project in Circleville Township and the numbers equated, and so I looked at what kinds of jobs in that community could afford and would qualify to live in an affordable housing project, and it was the sheriff's deputies. It was the guys at the front of the door of the room, right? It was the secretary for the commissioners, just the different salaries in the county. So that's an interesting frame of reference, and I just wanted to bring that up since Jennifer had done such a good job earlier. So I've had the great pleasure to do business in Lancaster and Fairfield County for about 17 years. Commissioner Steve Davis was my business partner for 16 and a half of those years, and brought me down to talk to the communities, and in particular at the time was predominantly Lancaster, about how we can take those growth strides in the early 2000s when we were growing as we came up to 2008. The city of Lancaster has benefited from vision from many years back. There's an east corridor and there's a west corridor. Most recently, I had the really great fortune to bring something full circle for a local resident that we had represented over the years, and here recently for a Google, for the Google development that's off of the bypass at 188. The development that's happening here, it takes a little bit of courage, and it takes courage. It might take a little bit more than courage. But the idea, if you are having an open communication with your constituency to say, we're going to take a chance and we're going to hedge our bets. And I just saw Gail, I just see you right there. Hello, haven't seen you in a while. Gail Ellinger is a trustee in Hocking Township, just outside southwest side of Lancaster. So this is a great segue for how growth and discussion happens, right? Because the township has been in discussions with Lancaster for many years about how to utilize certain tools in the law to generate revenue that might benefit both communities. So the reason I'm here today, I told you what I do for a living, and I'm going to talk about the money. But the reason that I'm talking to you about the money is because in my role for private developers, which is 75% of what I do, 75% is development work of all of those because we've been growing for so long. Of that 75%, 75% is private. The other 25 is comprised of events like this and niche projects like this where we talk about annexation or we talk about JEDs or we talk about mergers strategically. But most of the time, it's the private developers who are coming to the jurisdictions with ideas about how to pay for things. And so that's how I come here today to talk to you. So I'm going to talk about money, and I think about money and tools for money in a couple different ways. I think about it as, first of all, saving money. Because if you think about the government and you think about projects like your own money, right, what's the first thing? Well, it's easy to tighten your belt and start looking around and see what really matters and do some priorities. So if you can save some money. Jamie Green from Planning Next is behind me on the agenda to talk about plans. There's a huge component of financing about saving money and then where you spend your money as a local jurisdiction that's all around planning the idea, right? So there's a couple points. First, sprawl. That's an older term that we used to use as single-family homes, 1 acre lots, 1, 2, and 5 acre lots would develop. Then we went down to half acre, and then we started talking about densities around that. That's like right over the last 20 years really honed that. We as developers hear about we don't want to lose the rural character. But the question that I would pose is a series of 100 1 acre lots really preserving the rural character? And is it really preserving the industry around your agricultural land? Statistics that we heard earlier were that 54% of Fairfield County remains agricultural. And if we develop 13,000 of it, and imagine if you do it right, that'd be interesting, that still have 50% of your land for agriculture. Agriculture is a huge industry. Kenny spoke to this, and Kirsten, the idea of how local you keep your money and your cycle of money. The more local that you keep your money, the more jobs that you have and those kind of things. There's a whole theory around how the cycle of money and how you can keep it in your community more. But it also hedges recessionary types things. But point being, that's a huge industry here. If you're using Jamie Green from Planning Next properly, you're putting that as a main priority, which is your industry and how do you preserve your industry, because that's your workforce and that's the local saving of money. Now, the idea around comprehensive plans, before I talk truly money, is Kirsten mentioned that there's a preservation, right? Downtown Lancaster has seen a resurgence. A little bit of private development, a lot of county and city money going into downtown Lancaster to create the old style of town living, where you are closer to where you live, you're closer to where you work, you are closer to where your children go to school. There's less travel, there's savings on the biggest issue that we heard everybody talk about. First of all, you commit to the idea of a density. Density saves the dollars so that you can provide the amenities. The idea about first floor residential or first floor commercial with residential above, that has a place in the life cycle of all of us at some point, right? We hear a lot about apartments. Poor Joe gets beat up 4 nights a week about apartments. But the fact is, lots of folks live in apartments. And right now, lots of folks choose to live in apartments because of costs of maintenance, drive time during the day. There's 2 or 3 things that we heard just this past week about the choices that are being made towards different kinds of housing. So, yes, we love 1 acre lots, but the idea, 1 acre lots, not only do they eat up your farmland, but they stretch your utilities, and that's the 50-unit development that Josh was talking about. You as a government spend too much money on extending pipes and utilities too far to not preserve your rural character. Also, the schools, a series of single-family homes doesn't provide a diversity of tax base for you to pay for your schools. So it completely contravenes 2 of the biggest pushback points that we see as developers. So why does that matter? There are tools associated with the mixed use. Ricketts, his point about mixed use is not lost. There's a concentration of dollars that happens there, and there are tools around the dreaded multifamily development that helps. So as the developer, we come with a lot of ideas on how to pay for certain projects. The TIF, tax increment financing, and let me say two things. I'm going to throw out a couple concepts tonight. The commissioners are going to keep an open conversation. We're happy to continue this. But there are tools out there that you should know about, and you hear about them, and you think, oh, well, what are the pros and cons of that? And we may or may not like them. We got to dispel a few myths around them. Multifamily apartments generate lower children than most people realize. That's a complaint. So we have to kick that off the list that was up here earlier. Second, they pay taxes, lots of taxes. So there's revenue that is generated from the tax base of multifamily. Multifamily, though, is residential in all of our codes, right? But it's actually commercial. It's actually a commercial tax base. So again, not as many children. We pay a lot of taxes. And from those taxes is a revenue source to help bridge the gap with your governments to pay for important public improvements like roads, like utility extensions, stormwater being one of our biggest ones now, and especially here in Fairfield County. Got a lot of stuff going on in that northern corridor. A TIF is a tool that we use. Now, the TIF plus the public-private partnership allows for the private developer to help carry a little bit of the burden because most governments are behind in their improvements. And so we see this all the time. It's either in terms of traffic or it's in terms of utilities. TIFs are amazing. They take the improvement value, the value of the improvements that you pay into a separate fund that can then be utilized for qualified public improvements. They can be used to structure financing, right? So to issue bonds and to issue debt and pay in advance. They're a revenue stream that can be used by your government. Now, I want to take a quick pause here and tell you that there's a gentleman here who could not be with us tonight. His name is Pete Griggs. Pete Griggs is a partner with the law firm of Loveland and Brocious. A lot of you were going to go back, you're going to call the commissioner, you're going to call the Ohio Township Association, and you're going to go, hey, listen, we need some more help on that. Pete is the prolific township attorney in the entire state of Ohio. Pete is the B side to my, my single solo hits. He's the B side to my, routine, flip side of my coin. Because Pete, as the attorney for the township, works with us to develop these types of financing plans, these land use plans that work to save costs, that work to share public and private areas where we can help offset your costs, and then we can get paid back later out of the revenue stream that comes from TIFs. So with proper planning, roads get built where they could not otherwise be afforded. If you guys go to Delaware County on a regular basis, the extension of Home Road, we did that. It's currently underway through a series of TIFs that were involved the county, the private developer, in that case is my client, the Schottenstein Real Estate Group, the landowners who retained sizable areas of land for future industrial development, and we were able to utilize those sources of revenue to spur the county's project. Those tools also work for different improvements that relate to schools as well. So that's one is a TIF. Couple more minutes, Commissioner, to say we are looking actively at self-imposed taxes, self-imposed millage through new community authorities to help us pay for public improvements. You assess the millage. It's the New Albany model, right? Everyone's familiar with that nowadays because it's all in the paper. But the government can impose them. You can assess millage that you earmark for specific public improvements, and those get added to the taxes. Now everything is becoming more expensive. but that is a way to get out ahead of large utility extensions or cleanup projects for both utilities and roads, stormwater. NCAs can also be used for different school improvements, because certain school improvements are also public improvements. And so that's how we go about problem solving. Those are just the two big ones. The other one that we should talk about is the use of economic development tools and JEDs, which I'm sure the county speaks to on a regular basis, as your annual meetings. Everybody's paying income tax nowadays. I know it seems odd, and Ms. Ellinger, you might be saying to me, it's not happening over here, but there's a time and a place for that, where if they're gonna pay 2.5 to the city of Columbus, they might as well pay some percentage of that to you and that is one way. There's also benefits associated with that so that you can keep your areas unincorporated. But that's an agreement between the unincorporated areas and an incorporated municipality to impose an income tax and then share revenues. Sometimes you define what they're for because you have these overlap areas, and sometimes it's just a 50-50 split. So those are the main points that I wanted to make about the different kinds and how we come to that. So it's a conversation. There are tools and answers. We're helping governments pick up where in certain areas of central Ohio, they're behind, in particular on roadway improvements, they're behind 20 years. And it's really hard to find those funding gaps. So we're certainly working through MORPC, and we do a lot of those programs through ODOT and TRAC, and we talk all about those as well. But there is a component where the private developers can come to you and say, there's a couple tools you might want to use. And you talk about them, talk about the non-school aspects. And then once you get rolling on that, if you can open your minds to those ideas, once you see the improvements being made and bridging those gaps in your communities so that you don't have an intersection that shouldn't be there because we couldn't afford to fix it properly, that's the goal. Any questions? I'm sure 20 of them, but yeah.
What was Pete's last name?
Please state your name.
Jeremiah.
Oh my gosh, hi, how do you do? Well, thanks. So how do you do? Pete Griggs, I'll give you his name and his number. Hi, I work with your guys all the time, so nice to meet you. Anything else?
We have questions about, so Laura did a great job with 10 minutes to talk about TIFs, to talk about JEDs, to talk about community development authorities, talk about CEDAs. Those are very complex, in-depth tools, right? But they are tools. And those tools can be used to help townships and villages work cooperatively to generate revenues, right? Again, revenues that you don't have today that you can use to build your community. All right. Thank you, Laura. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the reason that I asked you all to come here tonight, and that is how do we create this plan, right? I think we've done a good job of getting to this point where you know now that growth is coming and you know what developers need to hear about, and you know that there are some tools available for you to generate revenue. So now what do we do as a township? What do we do as a village or a city? The big reason we asked you all to come here tonight was to talk about how you can in your township or village work to create a plan that developers can then use to know the rules to see if it makes sense for them to want to develop in your community. And so that you've got a tool that you have worked with your residents, right? So that there's not in my backyard, right? Because it's part of your plan. So we are fortunate tonight to have Jamie Green with us. When I asked Rick Zabrak and John Melkai, who's the best in the business when it comes to planning, they both came back with the same name. So I am pleased to introduce Jamie Green and have him give you his expertise on planning.
Thank you very much, and good evening for like the 8th time, I think, here tonight. I really appreciated Laura's comments about the economics of planning, because as surprising as it may be, it's not always a fundamental part of a plan. A lot of time it's really just the physical dynamics of a place, and it doesn't really talk about fiscal sustainability. So that was terrific to hear. So one of the things, and I apologize, I don't know where we are in terms of the starting point about how many have been involved in creating a plan before or not. So forgive me if some of it seems elementary or too far, but one of the things I would want you to know is that if you're thinking about trying to organize your community, is that there is a rational process. You don't have to figure that part out on your own. The state of Ohio, through the Ohio Revised Code, has guidance on what a comprehensive plan should be and what it should look like. What it is basically about, though, is trying to shape the future of your place, being very conscious about that. And I just, last weekend was reading an article on futurism, and there was a quote by Mark Twain said that predicting is really, really tough, especially when it's about the future. And, your planning work will likely be tough work. There's levels of complexity. If you didn't have that, didn't feel that before you came in here tonight, there's a level of complexities in terms of trying to tie the important policy-making decisions together. So starting from, the highest level is that if we talk about a comprehensive plan, it is the broadest policy document a community can have to direct where it's going in the future. The broadest policy document. It's comprehensive. I mentioned the Ohio Revised Code. It does provide guidance if you go there, and it says, it should include a land use chapter, if you will. It could create, other topics like transportation. You have a great deal of flexibility to decide what goes in that plan. The state of Ohio is not going to do that, which Kenny and I were just talking earlier that we've done a couple of county plans in the state of South Carolina, including Charleston County. And, I say this a bit tongue-in-cheek, but in the progressive state of South Carolina, you actually have to have a plan every 10 years and an intermediate update every 5. And when you do it, you have to include very prescriptive sort of topics. And you have to work with your neighboring jurisdictions. And if you don't do that and you want state resources, you're not going to be considered favorably for that. So you don't have that, but you can look at some of these other places that actually do it maybe a little bit more, I'm going to say it, organized than maybe the state of Ohio does that. The plan is really important to you. You've heard zoning being talked about here. The legal basis for the zoning is the comprehensive plan's land use element. So your zoning is likely to only be as good as the comprehensive plan dictates relative to the land use element. Some townships, some villages, and even some cities, they will do, a comprehensive land use plan and really focus on the physical form as opposed to some of the others. But I want you to keep that in mind, that one of the reasons that a lot of communities do this work is mainly to get to where they can have the zoning for it. Now, on the land use part, we have found more and more that investors, businesses, residents are placing more emphasis on the quality of place, the character of place, that people want to have that sort of dimension to their community. And so when you say land use, I'm guessing some of you've seen land use plans, and you see basically a map with splotches of color. Here's the red for the commercial, here's the brown for residential. And no one knows how that blob would manifest itself three-dimensionally when development happened. No one knows. So it is no wonder in some communities when you go to a planning or a zoning or rezoning meeting and someone says, I had no idea it was going to look like that. It's because no one has illustrated what it could look like. So when you think about the land use, I want you to think about not just in terms of two-dimensional aspects of the place, but in the three-dimensional aspects. Now, townships legally have some limitations about what they can do about aesthetics, but that does not keep them from expressing their values, right? Because then a developer or investor comes in knowing full well that even though something's not legally enforceable, there are some strong held sentiments about their values of the quality of place. When we think about a planning process, there are some principles that we like to adhere to. One is that the plan, your plan and the process ought to be unique to where you are. There are different values, different issues, and you need to make sure that you're just not doing somebody else's planning process. What I see a lot of is communities, and sometimes it's for good reason because there isn't a lot of resources for planning. They will call another jurisdiction and say, didn't you issue an RFP 2 years ago to do a planning process? Would you send that to us? And then it just becomes a cut and paste issue. And then you in your community get a plan that has, has strong sentiments about what's important someplace else, like natural environment or climate change or something that's not really yours. So I think you've got to work to really be hard about doing your own thing. And doing your own thing, I'm going to give you like what I think if you and your community say, I think we're ready to get organized for a plan. We're big proponents of what we call a plan for a plan. Don't just jump into doing the plan, but really figure out what are you trying to accomplish? What are the outcomes that are really important to us in the work? Who's going to be involved? Typically for us, there's a leadership group. Call them a steering committee, call them an advisory group. Who are they? And should you be getting them involved early so that they can own, not just own the plan, but to own the process? Because chances are, people who don't own your process are less likely to own the outcome. So anyway, there's a whole pre-planning piece that gets into the timing, the substance, the resources that are required for it, the schedules required for it, whether or not you're going to collaborate with other jurisdictions that are nearby or not, but really putting together your base plan here. So that's like making sure this is unique to your place and well designed. Another principle is about inclusive, and I've heard references to that here this evening, but who is going to be involved in this process? I think your objective should be anybody who cares about the future of your community ought to know that they have an opportunity to participate and that they are welcomed and treated well in the work. Most of the elected officials we work with, when you go to report out that you had a process and you had people involved, they want to know who was there. Were my people there? Like, were we really represented? And so being deliberate initially around the inclusiveness, it goes back to this committee. I'd be glad to answer any committees about any questions about leadership committees. I've seen it every which way. But for us, that leadership group is where legitimacy happens about whose plan is this. Is it a consultant's plan? Is it a staff plan? Is it a planning commission or elected officials? Whose plan is it? And we go to great lengths to figure out how to get a diverse group that's representative. They're really like the first pebble, in the pond. If you want a lot of people involved, the first is this leadership group that gets into the process. Some communities take it very seriously. In Sydney, Ohio, and Shelby, we did a joint plan for them, and we made a big deal about having an inclusive committee. And that's what everyone wanted. And then the elected officials and some staff went to put together a committee, even though they had a set of principles about how to do it. And then I went to interview some folks, and I went to interview a business person who ran a junkyard of all places with his own junkyard dogs. And so I was sitting in front of the window with the dogs there, and this guy was pretty intimidating, and he asked me about this steering committee. And so I told him what our intentions were, and then out comes his map. He had mapped every committee member, and they all lived in about a 20-degree wedge in the community. They were not representative at all. And somehow, when I realized that, that's when the dogs went crazy. But the point is, that's a very important part of the process, and you want to curate that group if they're going to pay dividends for you. And by dividends, I mean carry you to the adoption of the plan and also be good stewards of the plan when it's done. We never tell them that they've got a job after the job, but they really can be helpful to you going from that. So we also believe that good plans are both intuitive and informed. So we get people involved in the process and work really hard at it because we know that people know aspects about their community that no consultant, no staff ever figures out. because they have a lived experience. They've lived there, worked there, tried to raise a family in the place. So we're going to capture that intuition. The informed is doing the good research, and you saw from this evening that there is good research and we should be using it. But those two shouldn't really be allowed to sort of operate on their own. The intuitive part is really gets to the values of what's important here, and the informed to make sure you understand what your trends are. And trends don't have to be your destiny, right? You might have certain trends in your community, like, I like that, but that's not guaranteed, and so you want to put policies in place to keep that trend going. And then you may have other trends that are maybe going the other direction that you'd like to put policies in place that actually move them in another direction. So this idea of carefully bringing in the intuition and informed is really, I think, beneficial. And then here, this one should be like the blinding flash of the obvious to you. That one of the principles of doing this kind of work is that it must lead to implementation. Every step you take from your plan from the plan to finishing it, you ought to be thinking, how is this advancing us getting this across the finish line or not? It also means that when you structure your plan, there ought to be what we sometimes refer to as like the operations chapter. How are you going to monitor progress in this work? How are you going to report this progress to people who invested their time in you in the work that we actually did? So those are the 5 things that we think about without specifics to the detail. But I think that when you actually move into what do we do, getting clarity about what you're trying to do. In some places, there is pressure, and your plan is really about trying to manage flow. Like, here it's coming. How are we managing the flow? In other places, it's about trying to manage progress. Things maybe aren't working as well. Working with a county up in northern Indiana that they've had 4 straight decades of population decline. That's not a managing growth scenario. It's a different kind of, but you need to, anybody, these are generic, it's not about you necessarily, but what do we need to do with that? But you've talked about infrastructure. When you finish your plan, there should be no mystery about where the leaders of your particular community think this infrastructure should be directed. That's important. The other part about the plan is that it should be the tool when you're looking for grant money or you're trying to instigate something to happen in your community is to justify it in the plan. This is the reason why we're asking for this money. How do we actually do it? We see time after time that those communities that don't have a plan, don't have a rationale for a recommendation are not always left behind, but really has some really real challenges there in getting that forward. Related to this, Kirsten said it, is you have to figure out whether you want to play offense or defense here. My experience with developers is that they do like predictability. They like to know that they're going into a community that will receive their ideas more positively than other. They'd like to go into a place where they know the infrastructure is supportive for the kind of things they want. This plan should be like their first stop. What is expected here? And if there are certain things you don't want, they'd probably like to know that earlier as opposed to later. So the predictability of this, I think, on the infrastructure part is really important to you. So I think we're getting close to the 10-minute, but I think I want to answer as many questions as we can, but I want you to think about this plan is being the mechanism to create the conditions for success, however you define that, right? This is the way to do it. I think it's more, I would want you to see it as more than just a technical sort of exercise. In many places we work, it is a real way to bring community together. And that's what's making a difference in a lot of places that we're working in right now is what does that dynamic work well. It is, I think it's more important than ever that people feel positive and good about where they live. And that is backed up by some research by the Gallup organization. I don't know if anybody, the Gallup Well-Being Index, right? There are 5 things that apparently all of us need to be under control about, to feel good about who we are and what we're doing. One of those is about do we have a sense of purpose in what we're doing? One is do we have, the social relationships? Do we feel financially secure? Do we feel healthy? But the fifth one is, how do we feel about where we live? Do we have enough positive emotional attachment to where we live to be fully realizing our well-being potential? And I think, I don't want to sound sappy to you, but I think that's part of what planning gets to. It's the quality of place and how you root people. There's also good research about the relationship, about the correlation between economic prosperity and emotional attachment. It turns out that many communities can't realize their economic prosperity potential, without emotional attachment. So I don't underestimate the ability of a plan to have some other residual benefits to you. So thank you very much. I think we're up for questions.
Questions? Come on, somebody's got to have lunch.
That must have been good.
Okay, on the economic, comprehensive plan, the steering committee, county committee, whatever we name ourselves.
Yeah.
We're trying, so for forward on this, how we do what we ask for, what we should consider, do we just call Jeremiah daily? Do we call Murray Griggs? Where do we get help with that?
You need to start the planning process?
Jamie, if you could use the microphone.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. I'm moving on here, but I do not know the answer to your question. So the next step, yeah. The question I think was when any of you are ready, you're ready to start a planning process, what's the next step? Who do we go to for that help? And I'm not sure who's been set up to do that.
That's why you're here.
It's Rick?
Well, you could start here, and we'll make, and we'll be involved in those conversations and expand the group and pull people together, yeah.
Right. So if I may, the whole idea was to get everybody to believe that creating a plan, if you don't have one, updating a plan, if you do, is of value, right? So as we progress down that road, that you decide that it's time for you to create your plan, Rick Zabrak is your starting point, right? And he will help you gather the resources, put you in touch with the right people to help you down that path. I was involved in the planning process in the city of Pickerington, and am happy to say that that plan has worked out pretty well there. The county has a great comprehensive plan, right, which you can go read online. It's available today as a starting point, right? But then when you get ready, start with Rick, and we will marshal all the resources we can to help you down that path, because we believe it's critically important to the health and well-being of our county long-term that all of our townships and all of our villages are moving forward, right? I've said it in all of your township and village meetings for the past 4 years, healthy townships and healthy villages make for a healthy county. The better you all do, the better we do, right? So that's why we're here tonight. So hopefully that answered your question. Call Rick Zabrak.
What is usually one cost to start one out?
What is a plan cost?
Well,
How intense you go into it.
So I could give you a range that it's probably from 40 to 150, 100,000, depending on what you want. If you already have a plan, a recent one, you've got a place to start. That's different than somebody who doesn't have much of one, or a very old one. I think it also, if you figure out, in the plan for the plan, if you decide you really want to do a pretty good dive on the infrastructure and transportation and economics, you want to do an economic component to yours, these things can add up for you. But I think it's a lot. It's just figuring out what you actually need. I appreciate the question, and I just wanted to say that for those of you who do have plans, I think the first step for that group is actually to do what we would call an audit, right? Is to go through the plan and figure out, what did you accomplish? Are there things that are still in there that are still relevant? Is there good data that we could just build on? So I think there's an audit piece before you jump right into the plan, if that helps.
Again, again, so as we start with this plan, and I know what my township probably is like my zoning committee.
Yeah.
They think they've got their heads, they're good shit.
Yeah.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
They don't
Yeah.
know what they don't know.
Yeah.
As far as the trustees, we have to go forward with this also.
Yeah.
What's our best course of action? Do we take everyone, we can't go screwed? How do we?
To do what?
To start the planning process, get the zoning people, to give them the knowledge of what they don't know.
Yeah.
So there's a number of things I think run through my head. One is, I don't really know what the composition of the group is, but there's some of these things that I think you could do more in a large roundtable piece. Like, it wouldn't have to be every one of you one off to kind of do the baseline piece. You could, in a forum just like this, that could happen. At some point, that won't be good enough, and you'll have to get together. So I think the first thing is you have to have people understand why they're doing this and the benefit, of doing it. I could see that in getting organized, that maybe there are some joint work sessions between, your trustees and the zoning commission group.
How do we aren't supposed to, we can only talk to zoning as a resident, not as a trustee.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you could set up a special meeting.
A special meeting
of
for
your
that.
township, right, with the zoning commission, to have that, to start this conversation. You could show them this video, right? I mean, that's a starting point. Yeah, I mean, we can work with you to help facilitate that. Other questions?
No, those are great practical questions. I appreciate them.
Other questions?
So Jeff, I mean, just as a county as a whole, and then going down to like the township and the village level, I know the county's done a good job of mapping out like where our growth is going to be, or where they want, like 33 corridors, one of them. But kind of go back to the trustees' question as well. Maybe we do need to organize and get together, because within our villages and our townships, what do we want to see to grow? Do we want our growth around our villages? And what villages are willing to grow? What utilities are available? And then working with Jeremiah and all that, okay, now that we've discovered utilities, what kind of road work do we need? So that way when our developers come in, we can pretty much say, hey, you can go, instead of Pickerington, you can go to Baltimore. Instead of Baltimore, you can go to Pleasantville, Rushville, whatever, and then it kind of gives out a map, and I think we'll all be on the same page, and the county as a whole. Because looking at the county, starting at the northern part with Violet Township and going down to like Madison Township or something like that, like the disparity is large. And the amount of people that you have to help you is very small as you go further south. And we can learn from each other through this process, and I think we can have a better plan in place, and that way it's, do we need to expand our infrastructure? Do we need better county roads in this area? And one of the things, that's a hot topic is also just our, how much access do we have to the web to make sure that when these housing developments go in, the students and the people that may work from home have access to high-speed internet, which I know our county doesn't have, throughout.
So I think that's a really good point, right? And part of the reason we asked all the townships and all the villages to get into one room together was to have that conversation, right? So that we can start having you all work together, because the best financial benefits and the best outcomes of all this are when we're working cooperatively, right? So it's a great point, and I appreciate it. Briefly on high-speed internet, county, the state, federal government, all throwing money around to work on that. So hopefully a few years from now, we won't be having that conversation. So I hope we've answered your questions. Talk to Rick. Yes, Gail.
To the developers, typically, what is the acreage requirement, or what's like the average acreage if we're looking at, our areas of like a multifamily unit? Like if you're gonna do a multifamily development, what is there a minimum, maximum? I mean, what are we looking at acreage wise?
For our development, it's 10 to 24 acres.
Okay.
And again, it'll always depend on more of the actual allowable density. Like I mentioned earlier, we like to focus, somewhere close to 240 units. So the equation works with less acres. The requirement is less than acreage.
Okay.
For ours, it's probably anywhere from 25 to 500 acres, but it goes to what Joe said is the densities. I mean, at some point, if the county's gonna develop at, 500 acres you're gonna have 500 units for 500 acres, that's gonna be a lot of land for a really little unit. So how do you cluster those and do different things and build more efficiently, because the cost of extending sewer, extending roads for that will be really, really difficult to maintain.
So the question was, just for the video, how many acres would a township need to look at to set aside for a residential development? The answers that we heard were on the multi-family developments, 10 to 24 acres. On the single-family homes, anywhere from, would you say 50 to 500?
25 to, ideally 25 to 125, but we have projects that are 400 acres.
Right, and so part of that answer depends on what you want to build in your township, right? How dense do you want it to be? How clustered do you want it to be? I mean, those are all things that would come out of your plan that would help define what these guys want to do.
Would it make more sense, like we have 2 interchanges in our township, 33 runs, we've got 2 interchanges. Would it make more sense to try to put most of that around those interchanges when you're talking about roads and things like that that you're gonna have to maintain?
The short answer is, my legal background is it depends. I'd obviously have to know, it's so specific. Certainly if that's where your infrastructure is, it's gonna be a lot easier to do that, but where are the schools in that scenario? Where are the jobs in that scenario? The new interchange on 33 coming down here in Carroll, that one, imagine someday that it is the right place to build around that interchange, because you're right on 33, you're into Lancaster, you're into Columbus for work. The schools aren't far, that's all proximate. So those would be all of the planning things that I would be thinking about where it goes. Certainly if you have 2 interchanges and that's the only way to the bulk of the jobs in the schools, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to say your single family neighborhood's gonna be on the opposite side of the township.
So again, for the video, the question was, should development be planned around interchanges or around the 33 bypass? The answer is maybe. Is that, there are many factors. Where are the jobs? Where are the schools? What infrastructure is already there? So things like that. What other questions do we have? And any more questions pertaining to planning? Yes.
I don't know where this might go, but what she talked about, if it's commercial, it would need to be commercial to put multi-family units on. So if you're trying to preserve some farmland and you'd rather have multi-units, would that be something that could be in the planning where that could be changed from residential easily, or does that have to go through zoning?
Come on over here.
Well, I was gonna say, the answer to that is, and because I'm only doing like 10 of them right now, is there are a lot of, that's exactly how I feel, I'm close to it, right? But there are options, right? There are options for townships to put master plans in place. There are PUDs, there are overlays, all of those things are available to you once you start dialing into the creative ideas that you might have about, okay, this could be this or it could be this. There's options for that in the law, and they're available to townships, even though you're normally stuck, number 5.
So the question was, once you start going through this planning process, do you then have to worry about how your zoning matches up with your plan, if I am phrasing that correctly? And the answer is you have options. And as you go through your planning process, one of the things you'll want to do is engage with someone who understands all those options and can help you put that in as part of your plan. Did I say that right, Jim?
No, you said that right. I'm just going to emphasize that it's not uncommon that you go through a major planning process and you realize that you had some things zoned that maybe aren't appropriate any longer, and so there is a process that you actually have to go through. And and I know this is not a township, but in Upper Arlington a number of years ago, there were only 7 non-residential areas in that landlocked community. At the end of the planning process, they rezoned all 7 of them because it just wasn't consistent with what they needed going forward.
Any other questions before we start the wrap-up process?
So when we talk about zoning and for the developers, I know you touched on that, being one of your heartaches. Is it more just outdated zoning in some of these areas you go to? Is it just people are overprotective? Like when you say zoning, what specifically about zoning kind of gives you heartburn?
So, really good question. The first is probably the NIMBYism that was discussed, especially for housing. I mean, it's one thing if Intel's getting dropped in the community, a lot, the financial benefit people will wrap their head around. That's the first thing, is how are we gonna get met in the community, and is it a straight, most of it is, that we run into is very little productive conversation. I mean, it's the baseline is we don't want anything here. This was our farm field that we grew up in, and we don't want anything that. So that is really tough to overcome. But really now it's outdated zoning process and desire. The biggest one that we talk about in a lot of places is lot sizing. On an 80-foot lot, I build the same house that I build on a 50-foot lot. The only thing that I've got additional is 30 feet of side yard, and that's an extra linear foot of street, an extra linear foot of pipe to take care of, and people don't live in there, so they either live on their front porch or in their backyard or in the community open space. And so those are the challenges that we face, and those are probably the two most difficult things. So almost a question that I even had for Jamie is, how do you provide flexibility within these plans? Because I like the South Carolina idea that they're forced to look at it every 5 years. Where we run into a lot of trouble is, I mean, we could all go into the greatest planning process ever. However, in the day after we finish it, that Intel gets dropped there, we got to start all over again. I mean, it's got to be able to morph and change, and it's really a living document more than it is the hard and fast law. And that is also an issue we hit. Is like, oh, we had this comprehensive plan from 25 years ago, and it called for this piece to be industrial. However, now there's a school that developed here. It's set up perfectly to be, how can we do that? And then the residents won't get behind it because of that.
So, again, for the video, the question was, what is the big challenge with zoning? And I think, the answer is developers, well, first of all, outdated zoning is no good. And no zoning is no good, right? Or no develop. We don't want any development is no good. But really, every conversation I've ever had with anybody in the development community is they just want to know the rules, right? If you've got a very good plan with a clear roadmap and clear rules, they'll decide to do business or not, right? And they won't waste your time, they won't waste their time, and there won't be big fights. You won't have your village council or your township meeting filled with angry residents, right? Because those rules have been set, and hopefully those residents have been involved in that process. So the more we go down this path together of creating these plans, the better off we're all going to be. All right, Jamie, thank you very much. Really appreciate you being here tonight. Yes. So I think we've just had our open discussion. Commissioner Davis has been gracious enough to sit here throughout the evening and asked if he could have a minute to address the group.
Appreciate folks being here tonight. I just wanted to take a moment and share a couple thoughts. I've been involved in community service now for a long time. I was a city councilman for 9 years, and I've been a commissioner now for about 11 years. And I think if I could probably say the one thing as a leader in the community that I've heard the most over the last 3 decades is we want good paying jobs. We want good paying jobs. What are you doing to get those good paying jobs in here? And through a lot of work from a lot of people and perhaps a little good fortune spread in there, those good jobs are here, and there's a lot more on the way. You've heard a lot about the Workforce Center tonight and some of the good work that's going on there. If you don't know about that, pull one of us aside and we'll tell you all about some of the good things that are going on there. So that thing that we've been hearing for a long, long time, we want those good jobs, we want those good jobs, we want those good jobs. Okay, now they're here, or almost here, and now we got to deal with that. And in that spirit, I just wanted to say, when I first heard the idea of having this meeting tonight, I wasn't as enthusiastic about that idea as others might have been. But as I sat here tonight and I heard from some of the absolute rock stars that joined us tonight, Columbus Partnership was here, One Ohio was here, Morpsey was here. We had some good developers share positive information with us. I actually caught myself feeling a little blessed here to have so much talent from so many wonderful different vantage points being brought to bear on this problem that we're on the precipice of, that I now am concluding, after my lack of enthusiasm, that this was a really good idea. And so I want to give a shout out and a thank you to my colleague and Commissioner Jeff Fix. I appreciate you all being here, and I look forward on behalf of the Commissioner's Office to working with you as we try to solve this significant problem together. Thank you all very much.
I swore I didn't pay him to say that. Listen, you guys have been great. You've been attentive. You've asked good questions. Hopefully you've got some good information to take back with you. This is just the starting point. There's a lot of work that we all have yet to do on both our side as a county government and your side with your local governments. But we're all in this together. So if there's anything that you need, any questions that you have, please reach out to me. Please reach out to one of the other commissioners. Please reach out to Rick, Jeremiah, anybody that you need, all right? We're here for you. We're all in this together. Thank you all very much for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. Thank you.